Have you ever noticed something strange about life? The harder we try to control everything, the more out of control life seems to become. We try to control our future. We try to control people. We try to control what tomorrow will bring. And yet, the tighter we hold on, the more life slips through our fingers. But what if the real problem was never life itself? What if the real struggle was the illusion that life was meant to be controlled at all? In the next few minutes, I want to explore something simple, yet deeply liberating. A way of living that philosophers, psychologists, and Buddhist teachers have quietly pointed to for centuries. A way of finding peace, not by controlling life, but by understanding how life truly moves. So let me begin with a simple thought. Part 1. The paradox of control. Let me begin with a simple thought, one that may feel a little uncomfortable at first. The harder you try to control life, the more life begins to control you. Just pause with that idea for a moment. Because if we are honest with ourselves, most of us have spent a large part of our lives doing exactly that, trying to control things that were never meant to be controlled. We try to control outcomes. We try to control people. We try to control time itself. And often we don't even realize we are doing it. A few years ago, a gentleman in his 70s shared something with me after one of my talks. He said, "I spent 40 years planning my life, and almost nothing went according to my plan." He wasn't bitter when he said it. In fact, he smiled. But there was a quiet wisdom in his voice. Because by that age, he had discovered something that many people never fully see. Life does not unfold according to our attempts to control it. It unfolds according to its own movement. You see, most people spend their entire lives fighting reality. They fight what already happened. They resist what is happening now. And they worry about what might happen tomorrow. Have you ever noticed this in your own life? Perhaps a situation didn't go the way you expected. Maybe a relationship changed. Maybe your plans didn't unfold the way you hoped. And immediately the mind begins to say, this shouldn't be happening. This isn't fair. This is not what I wanted. But reality rarely asks for our permission. Reality simply moves, not because life is cruel, not because the universe is against us, but because life itself is movement. The seasons move, the rivers move, our bodies change, our circumstances change, everything in existence is in motion. Yet the human mind longs for something else entirely. It longs for certainty. Psychologists have studied this for decades. In fact, the human brain is wired to seek patterns and predict the future. Our nervous system feels safer when things seem predictable. But here's the paradox. The more we try to freeze life into certainty, the more tension we create inside ourselves. I sometimes ask people to imagine trying to hold a river still with their hands. Picture that for a moment. You step into a flowing river, and you try to stop the water from moving. The harder you push, the more the water rushes around you. Soon your arms grow tired, your body becomes tense, and the river continues flowing exactly as it always has. Life is very much like that river, and suffering often begins the moment we try to freeze it. Now I want to be honest with you. I did not understand this for many years myself. Like many people, I believed that if I planned carefully enough, if I worked hard enough, if I thought deeply enough, I could shape life into the form I wanted. But slowly, experience began to teach a different lesson. Plans changed, situations shifted, people made choices I could not control. And gradually I began to see something that the Buddha quietly pointed to more than 2,000 years ago. Much of human suffering does not come from life itself. It comes from our resistance to life, from the tension between what is happening and what we wish were happening instead. And the moment we begin trying to freeze life, we begin to suffer. So today, I want to invite you to gently explore this question with me. What if peace does not come from controlling life, but from understanding how to flow with it? That is the thought I leave with you at the beginning of our journey today. Part 2. The Invisible War. Let me ask you something gently. Have you ever finished a long day and felt tired, even though nothing particularly dramatic happened? No big crisis, no major problem. And yet, something inside still feels exhausted. A quiet heaviness in the mind. Many people assume this feeling comes from work, from responsibilities, from age, or from the stress of modern life. But over the years, through listening to many people and studying both psychology and Buddhist philosophy, I've come to see something deeper. Much of our exhaustion does not come from what we do. It comes from a quiet struggle happening inside us all day long. Every day. We fight small, invisible wars. We fight the traffic when it moves too slowly. We fight delays when something interrupts our schedule. We fight other people when they behave differently than we expect. Sometimes we fight outcomes, hoping things will turn out one way and fearing they may turn out another. And as the years pass, many people even begin fighting time itself. They fight aging. They fight the changing body. They fight the quiet realization that life is moving forward, whether we are ready or not. But here is the part that is rarely spoken about. These outer struggles are not the real war. The deepest war is happening somewhere much closer. Right here. Inside the mind. You see, at every moment of the day there are two realities unfolding. The first is simple. What is happening? A conversation, a delay, a change of plans, a wrinkle appearing in the mirror, a phone call that brings unexpected news. This is simply life unfolding. But at the very same moment, the mind quietly creates a second reality. A story about what should be happening. This should not be taking so long. That person should not treat me this way. My life should be easier by now. This was not supposed to happen. And the moment these two realities collide, a gap appears. A gap between what is and what we wish were true. It is inside that gap that most suffering quietly grows. A friend of mine once described it in a very simple way. He said, "Nothing made me more tired than arguing with reality." I think many of us know exactly what he meant, because arguing with reality is a battle we can never truly win. Reality does not debate. Reality simply unfolds. More than 2,000 years ago, the Buddha looked deeply into this human struggle and gave it a name. He called it dukkha. Now, many people translate that word as suffering, but the meaning is more subtle than that. Dukkha does not only refer to pain, it refers to the inner friction we feel when we resist the way life is moving. It is the discomfort that arises when the mind says, "This moment should be different." Modern psychology has discovered something very similar. Researchers studying stress often find that our nervous system becomes most tense not when difficult things happen, but when we mentally resist those experiences. In other words, the struggle inside the mind often creates more suffering than the event itself. This is why two people can experience the same situation, yet one feels peaceful while the other feels deeply distressed. The difference is not always the event. Often the difference is resistance. So perhaps the question we might begin asking ourselves is not, "How can I make life obey my expectations?" but something much quieter. What would happen if I stopped fighting every moment that does not match my plans? What if the deepest peace in life begins not by winning the war, but by seeing that the war was never necessary in the first place? And I leave that question gently with you as we continue this journey together. Part 3. The Three Illusions of Control. As we begin to look more closely at this invisible struggle inside the mind, something interesting starts to appear. Most of the tension we carry, most of the quiet suffering we feel, does not come from thousands of different problems. It usually comes from just a few very simple misunderstandings about control. Over the years, both psychologists and contemplative traditions like Buddhism have noticed a similar pattern. Human beings tend to struggle in the same three areas of life. Three places where the mind believes it can control far more than it actually can. And when we don't recognize these illusions, we spend years, sometimes decades, fighting battles that cannot truly be won. So let us gently explore these three illusions together. Not as a lecture, but simply as something to reflect on. The first illusion is the belief that we can control the future. Now, planning, of course, is not a problem. Planning can be very wise. It helps us organize our lives and make thoughtful decisions. But many people quietly cross a line without noticing it. Planning slowly turns into worrying, and worrying turns into something even heavier. The belief that if we think about something long enough, we can somehow prevent pain. Have you ever noticed how the mind does this? It says things like, if I think about this enough, I'll be ready. If I analyze every possible outcome, nothing bad will happen. If I stay alert all the time, I can protect myself from uncertainty. But let me share something very simple that research in psychology has shown again and again. Worrying does not actually control the future. It only occupies the present. In fact, studies on anxiety show that a large percentage of the things people worry about never even happen. Yet the body still experiences the stress. The heart beats faster. The shoulders tighten. The mind becomes restless. So the future remains uncertain, and the present moment quietly disappears. I once spoke with a woman in her late 60s who told me something very honest. She said, I spent most of my life worrying about things that never came. When she said it, there was no bitterness in her voice. Just a quiet clarity. And perhaps many of us, if we look back gently on our own lives, might recognize something similar. The second illusion is a little more emotional. It is the belief that we can control other people. Now this one is especially powerful because it usually comes from love. Parents want their children to make the right decisions. Partners want their relationships to unfold in a certain way. Friends want to be understood. Colleagues want fairness. And so, without realizing it, we begin trying to shape other people's thoughts, their feelings, even their behavior. But here is a simple truth that most of us learn slowly over time. We cannot control what another person thinks. We cannot control what another person feels. And we certainly cannot control every choice they make. Yet we try. We try to guide our partners toward the choices we believe are best. We try to protect our children from mistakes. We try to influence our friends. We try to manage situations at work, and when people do not respond the way we hoped, disappointment appears. Not because those people are wrong, but because we were trying to control something that was never truly ours to control. A man once told me something after many years of marriage. He said, "Peace came to me the day I stopped trying to redesign my wife's personality." He said it with a gentle laugh, but there was real wisdom in that moment, because relationships often become lighter the moment we stop trying to control them. The third illusion is perhaps the deepest of all. It is the belief that we can control life itself. Life moves through seasons that none of us can fully command. There is aging. There is change. There are moments of loss. There are endings that arrive whether we are ready or not. Sometimes plans dissolve. Sometimes health shifts. Sometimes people enter our lives and later leave. This is simply the nature of existence. And it does not matter how intelligent someone is, how disciplined they are, or how spiritually developed they may be. No one escapes these movements of life. Not kings, not monks, not philosophers. Everyone who lives long enough eventually sees the same truth. Life is not a fixed structure we can hold still. It is a flowing process. And the moment we begin expecting life to remain stable forever, tension quietly begins to grow inside the heart. So perhaps the invitation here is not to control life more skillfully. Perhaps the deeper invitation is to see clearly where control ends and acceptance begins. Because when we begin recognizing these three illusions, the future, other people, and life itself, something remarkable starts to happen. A certain softness appears in the mind, a certain patience appears in the heart, and the constant struggle to manage everything begins to loosen its grip. So today, I leave you with a gentle question to reflect on. Which of these three illusions has been quietly asking for your energy all these years? Part 4. The breaking point. There comes a moment in almost every life when something quietly shifts, not always dramatically, not always with noise or chaos. Sometimes it happens slowly, almost invisibly. But something inside us begins to realize that the strategies we relied on for so many years no longer work the way we thought they would. Control begins to slip through our fingers, and that moment can feel frightening at first. Because many of us were taught from a young age that if we plan carefully enough, if we work hard enough, if we make the right decisions, life will unfold exactly as we expect. But life, as many older souls eventually discover, has a different rhythm. There comes a point when control finally begins to collapse. Sometimes it happens through loss. Someone we love leaves this world, and suddenly we realize how little authority we truly had over time. Sometimes it arrives through a breakup or a relationship that changes in ways we never imagined. We thought we understood the future of that connection, and yet life moved in another direction. Sometimes it appears through illness, a diagnosis, a pain in the body, a reminder that the human form we live in is not permanent. And in those moments, the illusion that we are fully in charge begins to soften. And then, of course, there is aging. This is a teacher that visits every human being who lives long enough. One day we look in the mirror and notice a face that carries more years than we expected. Or we notice the body moves a little slower than it once did. Not because something is wrong, but because life is moving forward exactly as it always has. And sometimes the breaking point comes through something even simpler. Failure. Plans that didn't work. Dreams that changed direction, paths we thought we would walk that suddenly disappeared. Have you ever experienced something like this? A moment when the structure of your plans suddenly shifted, and you realized you were standing somewhere completely unexpected? I remember speaking with a retired engineer many years ago. He told me something I have never forgotten. He said, "For 40 years, I believed my job was to control my life, and then life retired me before I was ready." He laughed when he said it. But there was deep reflection behind those words. Because that moment, the moment when our control collapses, often becomes the doorway to a different kind of understanding. At first, the mind may resist it. The mind may ask, "Why is this happening?" But slowly, something else begins to appear. A quieter realization, something that can feel almost shocking when we first see it clearly. Life was never meant to be controlled. Not in the way we imagined. Life was meant to be experienced, the moments of joy experienced, the moments of change experienced, even the difficult seasons experienced, not fought, not frozen, not forced into a rigid plan, simply lived. And when this realization begins to sink in, something surprising happens. The grip of control loosens, and in that space, a new kind of freedom quietly begins to appear. Not the freedom of controlling everything, but the freedom of no longer needing to. So perhaps the breaking point in life is not actually a failure of control. Perhaps it is the moment life gently invites us to discover a deeper way of living. And tonight, I leave you with a question worth carrying for a while. What if the moments when life stopped following your plans were actually the moments when life began teaching you how to truly live? Part 5. The Surrender Code. After many years of observing the human mind through philosophy, psychology, and the quiet wisdom of Buddhist teachings, something very simple begins to reveal itself. Freedom does not come from controlling more. Freedom comes from carrying less. And this is where two great traditions of wisdom quietly meet. One comes from the East, the teachings of the Buddha; the other comes from the West, the philosophy of the Stoics. Two cultures, separated by thousands of miles, yet both discovered something remarkably similar about the human condition. True peace begins the moment we stop trying to control what was never ours to carry. I sometimes call this insight the surrender code. Not surrender as defeat, but surrender as clarity. A kind of inner intelligence that recognizes the difference between what belongs to us and what does not. And this clarity begins with one simple question. A question I invite you to reflect on gently. What is truly mine to carry? Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who practiced Stoic philosophy nearly 2,000 years ago, wrote something that still resonates deeply today. He said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." If you pause with that sentence for a moment, you may notice how quietly liberating it is, because most of the stress we carry in life comes from trying to influence things that exist outside our control. Other people's choices, the unfolding of events, the unpredictable movements of time. But the Buddha expressed the same truth in a different language. He taught that attachment, the tight grip we place on how life must unfold, is one of the roots of suffering. When the mind insists that reality must match its expectations, tension appears. When the mind relaxes that grip, peace begins to return. So when we bring these two streams of wisdom together, Stoicism and Buddhism, a very clear understanding begins to form. There are only a few things in this life that truly belong to us. Your attention, where your mind chooses to rest; your response, how you meet the moment that is unfolding; and your intention, the quiet direction of your heart. Everything else is movement. The world moves, people move, circumstances move, time moves. And the moment we stop trying to freeze that movement, something inside us begins to soften. We no longer feel responsible for controlling the entire river of life. We simply learn how to navigate our small boat with awareness. And in that quiet shift from control to clarity, a surprising sense of freedom begins to emerge. So today I leave you with a question that may gently reshape how you carry your days. When something difficult appears in your life, pause for a moment and ask yourself, is this truly mine to carry, or is life simply moving as it always has? Part 6. Somatic Release. At this point, I would like to invite you to pause with me for a moment. Not to think, but simply to notice. Right now, wherever you are sitting, take a slow, gentle breath. There is nothing you need to fix in this moment. Just breathe. And as you breathe, bring your attention softly into the body. Notice your shoulders. Are they relaxed or quietly holding tension? Many of us carry the weight of our thoughts right there without even realizing it. Now bring your awareness to your jaw. Is it slightly tight? You might be surprised how often the body holds on to small tensions throughout the day. And now notice your chest. Is your breathing shallow or calm and open? Just observe. There's no need to change anything. Modern neuroscience has shown something fascinating about the human body. When we simply bring gentle awareness to areas of tension, the nervous system begins to shift on its own. Not through force, but through attention. In Buddhist mindfulness practice, this is sometimes called returning to the body, because the body lives only in the present moment. The mind, on the other hand, often travels far away into worries about the future or memories of the past, but the body quietly reminds us where life is actually happening, right here. So if you notice tension somewhere, in the shoulders, the jaw, the chest, do something that might feel a little unusual. Do not try to remove it, do not fight it, simply notice it, and for a brief moment, welcome it. Allow the body to feel exactly as it feels. Sometimes the deepest relaxation appears not when we force tension to disappear, but when we stop resisting it. And strangely enough, this is often the very moment when control begins to dissolve. So take one more slow breath and gently ask yourself, what happens when I stop trying to control even the sensations in my own body, and simply allow them to be? Part 7. Deconstructing the storyteller. Now there is another layer of understanding that begins to appear as we look deeper into the mind. And this is where mindfulness becomes truly powerful. You see, the mind is not only reacting to life, the mind is constantly telling stories about life. In fact, the human brain is one of the greatest storytellers that has ever existed. All day long, it quietly narrates what is happening. Sometimes the story sounds like this. This should not be happening. This is unfair. Why is this happening to me? And sometimes the story becomes even heavier. This is ruining my life. Have you ever noticed how quickly the mind creates these narratives? A simple event occurs, a delay, a disagreement, an unexpected change, and almost instantly the mind begins building a story around it. But here is something very important that many people do not realize. Thoughts are not reality. They are interpretations of reality. In mindfulness practice, we slowly begin to see thoughts the way we see clouds in the sky. They appear, they move, and eventually, they pass. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as cognitive distancing, the ability to notice thoughts without becoming trapped inside them. But the Buddha expressed the same idea in a much more poetic way. He invited people to observe the mind as if they were watching the weather. Some days the sky is clear, some days clouds appear, some days storms move through. But the sky itself remains unchanged. And this brings us to a very gentle but powerful realization. You are not the storm of thoughts moving through your mind. You are the sky in which those thoughts appear. The stories come, the stories go, but the awareness that sees them remains steady. So the next time the mind begins telling a dramatic story about what is happening in your life, pause for a moment and quietly ask yourself, is this reality, or is this simply a story passing through the sky of my mind? Part 8. Amor fati. Now I would like to introduce you to an idea that may feel a little surprising at first. In fact, when many people hear it for the first time, they pause, because it sounds almost impossible. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche called this idea amor fati, a Latin phrase that simply means, love your fate. Not tolerate it, not endure it, not merely accept it, but love it. And when people first hear these words, they often react the same way. They say, how can I love the difficult parts of my life? How can someone love illness, or loss, or disappointment? Those are fair questions, but Nietzsche was pointing toward something deeper than blind optimism. He was describing a radical shift in the way we relate to life. You see, most people divide life into two categories: things they welcome and things they resist. Pleasure is welcome, difficulty is rejected, success is embraced, failure is pushed away. But when we live this way, we end up fighting half of reality. Because life does not move in only one direction. It moves in cycles. Light and darkness, growth and decay, arrival and departure. Even nature itself teaches this rhythm. Winter does not apologize for coming. Autumn does not ask permission before the leaves fall. The river does not question its own movement. And yet human beings often expect life to unfold without discomfort. But here's the quiet truth that many wise traditions have discovered. Every experience shapes the depth of our understanding. Without difficulty, there is no depth. A life without challenges may feel comfortable for a while, but it rarely produces wisdom. Without loss, there is no wisdom. It is often through the moments of loss that we begin to see what truly matters. And without uncertainty, there is no freedom. Because certainty, if it existed completely, would make life mechanical, predictable, closed. But uncertainty opens space for growth. It opens space for discovery. It opens space for transformation. So when Nietzsche spoke of loving one's fate, he was not suggesting that pain itself is pleasant. He was suggesting something much more profound. What if every experience, even the ones we once resisted, was part of the path that shaped who we are becoming? A friend of mine once said something that stayed with me for a long time. He said, "The hardest years of my life were the ones that finally made me understand life." Perhaps you have noticed something similar in your own journey. Moments that once felt unbearable, that later revealed unexpected meaning. Moments that shaped your patience, your compassion, your strength. So maybe the deepest freedom in life is not found in avoiding fate, but in learning how to walk with it. And tonight, I leave you with a quiet question to reflect on. What part of your life story might still be waiting for you to make peace with, or perhaps even learn to love? Part 9. The 24-Hour Experiment. Before we finish our time together today, I would like to offer you a small experiment. Not a philosophy, not a theory. Just a simple practice you can try in your own life. For the next 24 hours, I invite you to approach life a little differently. Nothing dramatic, no big life changes, just one small shift in how you meet the unexpected. Because the truth is, something will go wrong in the next 24 hours, perhaps something small. Traffic may move slower than you hoped. Someone may say something you don't agree with. Plans may change. A message may arrive later than expected. Life, as we know, has its own rhythm, but when that moment appears, try something unusual. Pause, take a slow breath, and quietly say to yourself, "Interesting, this too belongs in my life." Not with sarcasm, not with frustration, but with curiosity. Just notice what happens next. And here is the important part. Do not focus on what happens outside. Traffic will still move slowly, people will still be people. Circumstances will still unfold in their own way. Instead, notice what happens inside. Something subtle begins to shift. The mind, which normally rushes to resist the moment, slows down. The body softens. The inner argument with reality becomes quieter. Psychologists sometimes call this cognitive reframing, the ability to shift the meaning we give to events. But in mindfulness practice, we see it even more simply. We stop fighting the moment, and the moment stops fighting us. At first, this may feel unfamiliar. The mind might want to return to its usual habits of judgment and control. That is perfectly natural. But if you stay with the experiment, something interesting often begins to appear. Your resistance softens, your mind grows quieter, and strangely enough, your heart begins to open a little more to life as it actually is. Not the life we planned, but the life that is unfolding right now. So over the next 24 hours, carry this small phrase with you. Whenever life surprises you, gently whisper to yourself, "Interesting, this too belongs in my life." And tomorrow, perhaps you might ask yourself one simple question. Did anything change? not in the world around you, but in the way your mind met the world. Part 10. The Quiet Freedom. Before we end today, let me leave you with one quiet reflection. Many of us have spent years believing that peace comes from controlling life, controlling our plans, controlling our future, controlling what tomorrow might bring. But slowly, as life unfolds, something deeper becomes clear. Life was never asking us to control it. Life was asking us to understand it. Because life moves the way nature moves. The seasons change. The river flows. Time continues forward whether we are ready or not. And perhaps the real peace in life does not come when everything goes according to our plans. Perhaps peace appears the moment we stop demanding that it must. I want you to imagine something simple. A river does not ask where it is going. It does not fight every stone in its path. It simply flows. And somehow, without forcing anything, it always reaches the ocean. Perhaps your life is not so different. Perhaps the moments you resisted were simply part of the journey. And perhaps the moment you stop fighting the river is the very moment you finally learn how to flow. So tonight, I leave you with this gentle thought. What might your life feel like if you trusted the river just a little more?